You owe us $850 a month in rent for your childhood bedroom. My mother said it the same way someone might remind you to bring a casserole to Sunday dinner. Calm, casual, reasonable. I looked down at the printed rental agreement sitting beside my iced tea and honestly thought it was a joke. The paper was neatly stapled. My name, Evelyn Carter. Monthly occupancy fee, $850. Due on the first of each month. Late fee after 5 days. I was 67 years old, recently widowed, sitting in the kitchen where I had once done algebra homework at 14, and somehow I was being charged rent to sleep in a room that still had the faint outline of my old bookshelf on the wall. Mark kept staring at his plate. My son had always hated uncomfortable conversations. Even as a little boy, he'd leave the room when voices got tense. Some habits never change. Denise sat across from me in a cream sweater, nails perfectly polished, expression calm enough to make everything feel rehearsed. It's not personal, she said softly. It's just about boundaries and financial fairness. Financial fairness. I almost smiled at that. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and baked chicken. Familiar smells. Safe smells. But nothing in that kitchen felt safe anymore. I wrapped both hands around my glass of water because suddenly I needed something cold to hold. Let me understand this, I said. You want me to pay rent for my old bedroom? Denise folded her hands together. You've been here 6 weeks, Evelyn. Utilities are expensive. Groceries are expensive. We all need to contribute. We all. Interesting word choice considering I had paid for half the groceries in that house since moving back after my husband passed away. I bought detergent, toilet paper, refilled their coffee pods because Mark insisted on those fancy espresso machines that sounded like small aircraft every morning. But I stayed quiet. Quiet has its uses. My mother slid the paper a little closer toward me. We think it's fair. Fair. That word landed harder than it should have. Because fairness had built that house. Fairness had poured concrete in August heat when I was 22 years old and working 2 jobs. Fairness had bought insulation, drywall, and roofing shingles when my father's construction loan came up short. Nobody mentioned fairness back then. Back then, they called it helping family. Denise cleared her throat gently. If this arrangement doesn't work for you, we can discuss alternatives. Alternatives. Such a clean little word for displacement. Mark finally looked up. Not at me. At the paper. Mom, nobody's trying to upset you. That almost hurt more than the contract. Because people always say that right before they do exactly that. I leaned back slowly in my chair and studied the faces around me. My mother avoiding eye contact. My son shrinking into silence. My daughter-in-law sitting straight as a banker approving a loan denial. Then I noticed something odd. Denise looked confident. Too confident. The kind of confidence people wear when they believe the paperwork protects them. I picked up the agreement and scanned the paragraphs. Occupancy terms. House rules. Payment schedule. Unauthorized guests. I read every word carefully. Then I looked up and asked the only question that came to mind. Do you want me to pay as a tenant? I said quietly. Or settle this as an investor? The room went still. Denise blinked first. My mother frowned slightly. Mark finally met my eyes. Investor, he asked. I folded the contract neatly and placed it back on the table. Never mind, I said. Just curious. But I wasn't curious. Not anymore. Because somewhere beneath the sting of humiliation, something older had begun to wake up. Memory. Numbers. Receipts. Saturdays spent carrying lumber. Canceled checks. My father's voice saying, "We'll pay you back when things stabilize." I hadn't thought about those words in decades. That night, lying awake beneath the faded quilt in my so-called rental room, I stared at the ceiling fan turning slow circles overhead. Then I remembered the cedar chest in the garage. The old one nobody had opened since Dad died. And suddenly, for the first time since that ridiculous contract slid across the table, I didn't feel hurt. I felt interested. I did not go back to sleep after remembering the cedar chest. At my age, memory does not arrive dramatically. It arrives quietly. A smell. A sentence. A number that suddenly refuses to stay buried. Around 2 in the morning, I slipped out of bed and padded down the dark hallway in socks older than some marriages. The house was silent except for the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and the soft ticking of the grandfather clock my father used to wind every Sunday evening. Funny how a house remembers people even when families do not. The garage smelled like old cardboard, motor oil, and dust warmed by years of summer heat. The cedar chest sat exactly where I remembered it, shoved behind paint cans and holiday decorations nobody had touched since before my husband Walter got sick. I knelt carefully, my knees protesting the concrete floor. The brass latch stuck the way it always had. Some things age honestly. Inside were old blankets, photo albums, tax folders, and a stack of envelopes tied together with fading blue ribbon. I almost stopped there. Almost told myself I was being emotional, dramatic, nostalgic. That is what women my age are told when our memories threaten somebody else's convenience. But then I saw my handwriting. Block letters. Black marker. House expenses. My hands went still. I sat cross-legged on the garage floor and opened the folder slowly. Receipts. Hardware store invoices. Copies of checks. Roofing material. Electrical wiring. Drywall deliveries. One receipt showed $4,300 for framing lumber. Paid by Evelyn Carter. I stared at the paper for a long moment. 29 years old. Newly married. Working mornings at the insurance office and evenings bookkeeping for a dentist practice because my father had called crying about construction delays and bank pressure. We were family, he had said. Just temporary help, he had promised. I remembered standing in this very garage counting cash from my second paycheck while Walter begged me to slow down before I burned myself out. I remembered carrying sandwiches and coffee to contractors on Saturdays because paying a crew overtime was too expensive. Nobody called me a tenant then. Nobody calculated my square footage or utility usage. Family contribution did not require receipts until suddenly it did. I heard the back door creak open behind me. I looked up to see Mark standing in the doorway wearing sweatpants and confusion. "Mom," he asked quietly, "what are you doing out here?" I closed the folder halfway. Organizing old paperwork. He rubbed his face. Even exhausted, he looked like the little boy who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms. "You should be sleeping." Such a gentle sentence. Such an easy escape route back into pretending. "Do you remember the summer your grandfather almost lost the construction loan?" I asked. Mark frowned. Vaguely. Of course he did. Children remember outcomes. Adults remember invoices. "I helped cover the shortfall," I said. "I know you helped around the house." Around the house. I almost laughed. There it was again. The shrinking of history into something manageable. Something harmless. I opened the folder and handed him a receipt. He scanned it quickly. His expression changed just slightly. Not shock. Recognition. Worse than shock sometimes. "I did not know about this," he said. "No," I answered calmly. "You were not supposed to." Silence stretched between us. The garage suddenly felt colder than it should have for late September. Mark handed the paper back carefully. "Look, about dinner." I waited. He shoved his hands into his pockets. "Denise is just trying to keep things structured." Structured. Another beautiful modern word people use when they mean transactional. I nodded slowly. "Tell me something, Mark." He looked tired already. "If I helped pay for the foundation of this house, at what point did I become someone who needed permission to sleep in it?" He opened his mouth, closed it again. The old clock inside the house chimed 3 times. Nobody spoke. Finally, he said, very softly, "I think things got more complicated than anyone intended." I looked down at the stack of receipts in my lap. Numbers do not become complicated. People do. And as Mark walked back into the house, I noticed something I had missed before. He had not denied any of it. Not the money. Not the history. Not the possibility that this house carried more of my fingerprints than anyone wanted to admit. I made coffee at 6:30 the next morning using the cheap store brand grounds I had started buying after Walter's medical bills rearranged my understanding of retirement. The kitchen was quiet. Pale morning lights stretched across the countertops. For a few peaceful minutes, it almost felt like the old days. Then I noticed the yellow sticky note taped to the refrigerator. Utility contribution due Friday. Denise's handwriting. Neat. Controlled. Cheerful in a way that made everything feel slightly managerial. I stood there holding my coffee mug and stared at the note longer than necessary. Not because of the money. $85 for utilities would not ruin me. I had survived inflation, layoffs, a difficult marriage season in my 40s, and the slow administrative marathon of losing a spouse. Money was rarely the sharpest wound. No. What lingered was the system of it. The quiet conversion from mother to line item. Family member to monthly expense category. Denise walked into the kitchen wearing running shoes and confidence. She stopped when she saw me reading the note. "Good morning," she said brightly. just trying to keep everybody on the same page. Everybody again. That word was working hard in this house. I took a sip of coffee. Do paying guests normally get assigned refrigerator notices? Her smile tightened almost invisibly. You are twisting this. Am I? She opened the refrigerator and began arranging yogurt containers with unnecessary precision. People often organize objects when conversations stop going their way. Evelyn, nobody is trying to disrespect you. Another familiar sentence. I had collected versions of it my entire adult life. We are not excluding you. We are not controlling you. We are not taking advantage. Language can be wonderfully creative when accountability enters the room. Then help me understand the timing, I said calmly. 6 weeks ago, I was family in crisis. Walter had just died. Everyone insisted I stay here as long as I needed. Now I have paperwork, contribution notices, and occupancy discussions. Denise closed the refrigerator door gently. Circumstances change. There it was. Clean. Efficient. Sanitized. Circumstances change. As though grief had an expiration date, and apparently mine had been 60 days. Mark entered halfway through the conversation, tie half done, laptop bag hanging from one shoulder. He sensed tension instantly. Children always know the weather pattern of their own homes. Morning, he said cautiously. Denise kissed his cheek. Small gesture. Practiced normalcy. I watched him pour coffee without looking at either of us directly. Avoidance had become his native language. Your mother has concerns about household expectations, Denise said smoothly. Household expectations. We were moving through corporate terminology at an impressive pace. Mark sighed quietly. Mom, maybe we can all sit down this weekend and talk through everything. Talk through everything. Translation. Delay discomfort until it becomes someone else's scheduling problem. I set my mug in the sink carefully. No need, I said. I am beginning to understand the structure. Denise nodded as though progress had been achieved. That nearly made me laugh. Structure. Boundaries. Expectations. Funny words to use inside a house where I once patched drywall until midnight because my father's contractor walked off the job. I spent the afternoon upstairs in my room going through the folder again. Receipts spread across the bedspread. Hardware invoices. Bank statements. Handwritten notes from my father. One yellowing envelope slipped open unexpectedly, and a folded paper fell into my lap. I unfolded it slowly. My father's handwriting. Tight. Slanted. Familiar. Evelyn covered foundation shortfall. Temporary. Repayment after refinancing. I read the sentence 3 times. Then a fourth. My pulse did not quicken dramatically. Life is not a courtroom television show. Real discoveries arrive quietly. They sit beside you on the edge of the bed and rearrange the meaning of old memories. Temporary. Repayment. After refinancing. I leaned back against the headboard and looked around the room. My old room. My rental room. My investment property apparently. Downstairs, I could hear Denise laughing softly during a phone call. Dishes clinking. The ordinary soundtrack of domestic life continuing without interruption. But something inside me had shifted into focus. Not anger. Not yet. Precision. That evening, before dinner, I placed a check for $850 inside an envelope and wrote one line in the memo section in careful block letters. Occupancy payment made under dispute pending financial review. Then I sealed the envelope and placed it neatly on the kitchen counter. If this household wanted to become transactional, I intended to keep excellent records. I expected confusion after the check appeared on the counter. Maybe irritation. Maybe a defensive conversation wrapped in polite suburban language. I did not expect Denise to organize the envelope into a household victory. Saturday morning, I came downstairs to find the check deposited, the refrigerator note updated, and a color-coded spreadsheet sitting beside the fruit bowl. Expense allocation plan. My name appeared in column 3 between internet charges and seasonal maintenance reserves. Seasonal maintenance reserves. I stood there in my robe reading my new place in the family ecosystem. Not mother. Not widow adjusting after loss. Budget category. Denise entered carrying a basket of folded towels. Good news, she said brightly. Now that everybody is contributing consistently, I thought transparency would be helpful. Transparency. Another polished word. The modern world had an impressive vocabulary for emotional outsourcing. I studied the spreadsheet. Monthly rent. Utility split. Shared grocery estimate. Property upkeep percentage. Then one line caught my attention. Structural maintenance reserve contribution. $120. I looked up slowly. Structural maintenance. Denise nodded. Roofing. Plumbing. Long-term property expenses. Responsible adults plan ahead. Responsible adults. I set the paper down carefully. There are moments in life when memory stops feeling sentimental and starts feeling dangerously specific. Roofing. Plumbing. Foundation. Drywall. I could practically smell sawdust. Hear nail guns firing in summer heat. See my father standing beside unfinished framing with worry tucked behind every sentence. Interesting category, I said calmly. Denise smiled. Home ownership is expensive. Home ownership. The phrase floated between us like an accidental confession. Before I could respond, my mother entered carrying gardening gloves and a travel mug. She glanced at the spreadsheet approvingly. Denise has really helped organize things around here. Around here. I noticed she had started saying that lately. Not our house. Around here. Ownership reshapes language before it reshapes behavior. Yes, I said quietly. I can see that. My mother sat down and reached for her coffee. Honestly, Evelyn, structure prevents resentment. I almost admired the irony. Resentment had apparently arrived wearing accounting software. I spent the rest of the morning in my room with the receipts spread across the bed again. I was no longer looking emotionally. I was auditing. Dates. Amounts. Material suppliers. One bank statement matched directly to a lumber invoice. Another matched roofing deposits. Then I found something tucked inside an old insurance file. A photocopy of a cashier's check. $15,000. Payable to Carter Construction Escrow. Memo line. Emergency completion funding. Signed by me. I sat completely still. $15,000. Not borrowed. Not reimbursed. Mine. Walter and I had postponed replacing our aging car that year because my father promised refinancing would make everything right. Walter had not complained. He rarely did. He simply drove the old sedan another 4 years while the air conditioning worked when it felt spiritually aligned with summer. I smiled faintly at the memory, then felt something colder settle underneath it. Downstairs, voices drifted through the floorboards. Denise talking. Mark responding quietly. The ordinary soundtrack of people secure in their assumptions. I picked up my phone and searched for Thomas Reed. Real estate attorney. Estate disputes. Property contribution claims. The same Thomas who had handled Walter's probate paperwork 8 months earlier. His office was 15 minutes away. Clean reputation. Practical mind. No unnecessary drama. Exactly what I needed. My finger hovered over the call button for a moment longer than necessary. Not because I doubted the facts. Facts were multiplying nicely. No, I hesitated because legal language changes the atmosphere around a family permanently. Once paperwork enters the room, nostalgia loses voting rights. Finally, I pressed call. The receptionist answered warmly. Law offices of Thomas Reed. I glanced once more at the spreadsheet beside my bed. Structural maintenance reserve contribution. I almost laughed. Hello, I said evenly. My name is Evelyn Carter. I believe I need someone to help me understand the financial history of a house my family seems very eager to monetize. Sunday arrived with the ceremonial seriousness of people preparing to discuss household management while completely unaware the paperwork landscape had shifted beneath their feet. The dining table had been arranged with folders, pens, printed spreadsheets, and a tray of blueberry muffins pretending this was a collaborative exercise instead of a quiet performance of authority. Denise loved presentation. Presentation creates legitimacy for ideas that might otherwise struggle in plain daylight. I took my seat calmly with my notebook beside me. Mark looked tired before the meeting even began. My mother carried in coffee cups with the determined optimism of someone hoping organization might outrun accountability. Denise opened a binder. An actual binder. Tabs. Labels. Color-coded sections. I almost admired the commitment. Thank you all for making time, she began professionally. Making time. As though I had RSVP'd to a regional budget seminar instead of attending governance discussions about the house, where my growth chart had once been penciled onto the pantry wall. Denise continued smoothly. The purpose of today's meeting is to review shared expectations moving forward. Shared expectations. Of course. There they were again. The familiar keywords marching confidently across another conversation. She distributed updated documents around the table. Revised contribution schedule. Kitchen usage protocols. Parking adjustments. Future occupancy planning. I read that last phrase twice. Future occupancy planning. Remarkable. Human beings can reinvent eviction language endlessly if given enough office supplies. Mark cleared his throat. The idea is just long-term clarity. Long-term clarity. Interesting timing for clarity to suddenly become valuable after decades of undocumented family financing. Denise turned toward me with managerial warmth. We want everybody feeling secure. Everybody. Secure. Two beautiful words sitting beside a contribution increase highlighted in yellow marker. I notice my household share has increased, I said evenly. Denise nodded. Property costs fluctuate. Property costs. There it was again. Property. Ownership language hiding in plain sight. I folded my hands together calmly. Question, I said. How exactly are contribution percentages being calculated? Denise brightened slightly, pleased to explain methodology. Usage patterns, occupancy status, maintenance exposure, long-term planning. Thomas would have loved this meeting. The language alone was practically volunteering for evidence status. My mother sipped coffee carefully. Mark studied his papers with the concentration of a man hoping eye contact might become optional. Denise flipped to another page. Also, beginning next month, we think formalizing residency terms would be healthiest for everyone. Formalizing residency terms. I looked down at the printed agreement being slid toward me. Revised occupancy agreement. Monthly obligations. Behavioral expectations. 90-day review provision. My own son shifted uncomfortably beside the fruit bowl. I let the silence breathe for a moment. Then another moment. People rush to fill silence when they believe they are explaining something reasonable. Denise did exactly that. This is not punitive, she said gently. It is simply structured cohabitation. Structured cohabitation. Incredible. She had transformed family displacement into condominium vocabulary. I opened my notebook slowly. Date. Time. Formal residency framework discussion. Contribution escalation. Occupancy contract revision. Then I closed the notebook again and looked around the table. I have something for the group as well, I said quietly. That got their attention. Denise leaned back slightly. Mark frowned. My mother looked cautious. I reached into my folder and removed a single photocopied document. Not everything. Just enough. The cashier's check. $15,000. Carter Construction Escrow. Emergency completion funding. I placed it gently in the center of the table. Nobody spoke immediately. Denise looked confused. Mark leaned forward. My mother's face changed first. Very subtly. Recognition has a soundless quality when it enters a room unexpectedly. What is this? Denise asked. I met her eyes calmly. Financial contribution documentation relating to this property's construction history. Mark picked up the photocopy slowly. His expression shifted as he read. Mom. Interesting word came up repeatedly this week, I said softly. Property. Nobody interrupted. Maintenance. Occupancy. Contribution. Ownership adjacent vocabulary seems very popular around here lately. Denise straightened defensively. I am not sure what point you were trying to make. I smiled politely. Small. Controlled. That is understandable, I said. My attorney said the same conversation might require context. The room changed at the word attorney. Not dramatically. Real tension rarely announces itself loudly. It tightens shoulders. Alters breathing. Rearranges assumptions silently around a kitchen table covered in spreadsheets and blueberry muffins. Mark lowered the document slowly. Denise stopped reaching for her binder tabs. My mother stared into her coffee cup like it had suddenly developed legal significance. And for the first time since this entire household transformation began, nobody mentioned structure. I have noticed something about family meetings. The moment legal vocabulary enters the room, everybody suddenly becomes thirsty, fascinated by paperwork, or deeply committed to avoiding eye contact. The silence after I mentioned my attorney lasted maybe 4 seconds. It felt longer. Denise recovered first. Of course she did. Competent administrators always do. She straightened the edge of her binder with deliberate calm. I think bringing attorneys into a household budgeting discussion feels unnecessarily aggressive. Aggressive. Interesting word choice from the woman who had introduced occupancy contracts, contribution increases, and refrigerator zoning regulations. I folded my hands quietly on the table. Household budgeting. I asked softly. I thought we were discussing structured cohabitation within a managed property environment. Mark closed his eyes briefly. Just for a second. Not frustration exactly. Recognition. Denise did not smile. That is not fair. Fair. There it was again. The most exhausted word in American family conflict. My mother finally spoke, voice careful around the edges. Evelyn, nobody is trying to erase what you did for this family. I looked at the photocopied cashier's check still sitting between the blueberry muffins and Denise's color-coded spreadsheet. Interesting phrasing, I said. Because until 5 minutes ago, nobody seemed especially interested in remembering it either. Mark leaned forward slowly. Mom, what exactly did your attorney say? That question mattered. Not because of the answer. Because of the shift. We had moved from dismissal to inquiry. Subtle, but important. I reached for my coffee cup calmly. He said documentation changes conversations. Nobody interrupted. He said language matters. Contribution history matters. Assumptions matter. Denise crossed her arms. Small movement. Defensive architecture beginning to appear. Are you claiming ownership of the house? Such a direct question. Clean. Efficient. Almost refreshing after weeks of policy memos and behavioral guidelines. I am claiming documented financial involvement in its construction and completion, I answered evenly. Those are different discussions, although apparently adjacent enough to justify legal review. Mark stared down at the photocopy again. $15,000? He asked quietly. That was in addition to materials, labor support, escrow assistance, and shortfall coverage, I said. There are receipts. The room went quiet again. My mother looked suddenly older than she had that morning. Not fragile, just tired in the specific way people look when unfinished obligations walk back into daylight carrying folders. Denise reached for her binder. A reflex. People reach for familiar systems when control begins slipping sideways. I still think we are losing perspective here, she said carefully. This started because we needed sustainable household expectations. Sustainable household expectations. Remarkable phrase. So polished. So clean. I nodded slowly. Then let us discuss sustainability. I opened my notebook and turned it toward the center of the table. Dates. Policy updates. Contribution escalations. Guest classifications. Residency revisions. Meeting notices. Mark leaned closer unconsciously. Denise's expression tightened almost invisibly. You documented us? She asked. Oh, there it was. The discomfort. Not about the rules themselves. About record keeping. You documented me first, I said gently. Rent schedules. Occupancy agreements. Quiet hour policies. Guest linen assignments. Mark looked up sharply. Guest linens. Nobody answered him immediately. That told its own story. I watched realization move slowly across my son's face. Not dramatic. Real understanding rarely arrives dramatically. It arrives like someone noticing the room temperature has been wrong for months. Denise exhaled quietly. You are turning organizational tools into personal attacks. No, I said calmly. I am treating them exactly as they were presented. Structured systems. Documented expectations. Financial frameworks. I paused briefly. I simply added historical accounting. My mother stared into her untouched coffee. Your father always meant to settle things, she said suddenly. The sentence landed softly but changed the air immediately. Mark looked toward her. Slowly. Settle what things? He asked. Nobody moved. Nobody reached for coffee or spreadsheets or blueberry muffins anymore. My mother realized too late that she had crossed an invisible line between vague memory and specific admission. Denise looked toward her sharply. I stayed quiet. Thomas had been right. People reveal extraordinary things when they believe they are defending a structure. My mother swallowed carefully. It was complicated. Mark sat back in his chair, eyes moving between the cashier's check, my notebook, and his grandmother's face. Complicated, he repeated quietly. Then he looked at me. Really looked at me for the first time in weeks. How much money are we actually talking about? I met his eyes calmly. That, I said softly, is exactly what my attorney and I are calculating. The meeting ended without resolution, which in family language usually means everybody retreats to separate corners and revises reality privately. Denise gathered her binders with clipped efficiency. My mother suddenly remembered errands that required immediate attention. Mark remained seated at the table staring at the photocopy like numbers had betrayed him personally. I began collecting my notebook quietly. No dramatic speeches. No accusations. Just paper moving back into folders. Documentation returning to storage. Mom, Mark said finally. His voice sounded smaller than usual. Can we talk? Denise looked up immediately. Quick glance. Brief tension. Invisible negotiations passing between married people who have spent years learning each other's warning signals. I closed my folder calmly. Of course. We moved to the back patio. Late afternoon sunlight stretched across the yard. The old maple tree cast long shadows over the cracked stepping stones. Walter and I had reset one summer because hiring landscapers seemed extravagant. Funny how unpaid family labor keeps appearing everywhere once you start looking for it. Mark leaned against the railing and exhaled slowly. I did not know. Simple sentence. Honest sentence. Maybe the first completely honest sentence I had heard in weeks. I know, I said quietly. Why did nobody tell me? He asked. I almost smiled at that. Adult children often believe information naturally flows toward them without obstruction, without timing, without complicated family loyalties shaping what becomes visible. Because families have a remarkable talent for labeling financial rescue as temporary support until enough years pass that nobody wants to reopen the ledger. He rubbed his forehead tiredly. So what happens now? There it was. Not denial. Not defense. Process management. His mother's son, after all. Now, I said gently, now facts get organized. He looked toward the yard for a long moment. Denise is going to panic when lawyers become official. Official. Interesting distinction. As though attorney consultations existed in a charming, unofficial pre-legal wilderness. I did not create this environment, Mark. My voice stayed calm. I adapted to it. He nodded slowly. Not agreement exactly. Recognition. Important difference. She thought she was helping, he said quietly. Ah yes. We had returned to the sacred family refrain. She meant well. She was helping. Nobody intended harm. I leaned back in my chair and watched a squirrel investigate the bird feeder with unreasonable confidence. Help usually does not arrive with occupancy contracts. Silence settled between us, comfortably uncomfortable. Then Mark asked the question I had been expecting since Sunday morning. How much are we talking about? I looked at him carefully. Really looked. 42 years old. Good heart. Conflict avoidant. Married into systems and spreadsheets until emotional language started sounding inefficient to him. Thomas is still calculating, I said. But construction funding, escrow support, material costs, documented shortfall coverage, inflation adjustment considerations. I let the sentence trail off lightly. Mark stared at the patio table. This could be substantial. Yes. No decoration. No softening. Just yes. The wind shifted gently through the yard. Inside the house, I could hear cabinet doors closing with slightly more force than necessary. Denise processing emotions through kitchen organization. Consistent branding. Mark lowered his voice. Mom, if this becomes legal, he stopped. Could not finish. Did not need to. If this becomes legal. Translation, if structure meets consequence. It already became legal when household governance started arriving in printed contracts, I said softly. That landed. I could see it. Small shift in posture. Quiet recalibration. Before he could respond, the patio door opened. Denise stepped outside carrying 2 glasses of iced tea she clearly had not originally intended as peace offerings. Thought you both might want something cold, she said evenly. Impressive recovery strategy. Hospitality after destabilization. I accepted the glass politely. Thank you. Mark looked trapped between gratitude, anxiety, and impending administrative collapse. Denise remained standing. I hope we can keep this proportional, she said carefully. Proportional. Beautiful word. Corporate. Balanced. Harmless sounding. I took a slow sip of tea. I agree completely, I said. That is precisely why detailed accounting matters. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Tiny pause. Controlled breathing. The subtle face of someone beginning to understand that the paperwork game had acquired another player. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. One message from Thomas read. Preliminary review completed. You should come in tomorrow. Bring full documentation file. I looked at the screen briefly, locked the phone, and set my glass down gently. Across from me, Denise noticed nothing. Mark noticed everything.